The sapphire bracelet caught the morning light as Caroline fastened it around her wrist. I watched her from the kitchen doorway, coffee mug growing cold in my hands. She hummed some tune I didn't recognize while adjusting her scrubs in the hallway mirror. "Another gift from your patients?" I asked. She turned, all sunshine and warmth. "Oh, this old thing. Mrs. Patterson insisted I take it. You know how they are at Silver Birch? They get so attached." Caroline kissed my cheek, leaving behind the scent of vanilla perfume. Too much vanilla for a woman heading to work with dying people, but I didn't say anything. I never said anything anymore. "I'll be late tonight," she said, gathering her purse. "Double shift. Mrs. Henderson is having a rough time?" "Again? End stage. Her family wants someone there." Caroline's voice carried that practiced sympathy she'd perfected over 10 years of nursing. "You know how it is." I knew how it was. Caroline, the angel of Silver Birch Retirement Estate. Caroline, who held hands with lonely widows and read stories to men who'd forgotten their own names. Caroline, who came home exhausted but fulfilled, always with some story about bringing comfort to the forgotten. St. Caroline. The door clicked shut behind her. Through the window, I watched her wave to Mrs. Chen next door, who was watering her roses. Caroline said something that made the old woman laugh. Even from inside, I could see that radiant smile that had made me fall in love with her 15 years ago. My phone buzzed, a text from my supervisor. "Building inspection canceled. Johnson's crew called in sick." Great. A free morning to think about things I didn't want to think about. Like how Caroline had been working more double shifts lately. Like how she'd started password protecting her phone. Like how she'd begun wearing makeup to work with people who were dying. I poured the cold coffee down the sink and grabbed my jacket. Maybe I'd drive by Silver Birch. Caroline had mentioned they were renovating the West Wing. As a building inspector, I could always find a reason to check on construction permits. But first, I had a stop to make. The jewelry store downtown was run by an old Armenian man named Artie who knew his stones. I'd bought Caroline's engagement ring from him 12 years ago. He looked at the photo I'd taken of her bracelet and whistled low. "That's a nice piece," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Sapphires like that, maybe 3 carats total. White gold setting. You looking to buy something similar?" "Just curious about value. Retail, maybe 2,800. Wholesale, 18 to 20. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Thanks, Artie." $2,800. Our joint checking account showed a charge from Westfield Jewelers 3 days ago. Same amount. Caroline had bought her own gift from a dying patient. I sat in my truck outside the jewelry store staring at the bank statement on my phone. The charge was there in black and white, $2,847.50 to Westfield Jewelers. The same day Caroline had come home talking about Mrs. Patterson's generosity. Mrs. Patterson, who, according to Caroline's stories, could barely remember her own daughter's name. But somehow she'd had the presence of mind to insist Caroline take a $3,000 bracelet. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through more transactions. Dinner at Chez Laurent, expensive French place downtown. On a night Caroline said she was working late. Hotel charges in the city, purchases at stores Caroline never shopped at. All on our joint card, all signed with her name. I'd been building inspector for 15 years. I knew how to spot structural damage, how to identify when something that looked solid was actually rotten underneath. The signs were always there if you knew where to look. The foundation of my marriage had been cracking for months. I just hadn't wanted to see it. 2 weeks later, Caroline came home with earrings. Diamond studs that caught the light when she moved her head. "Let me guess," I said from the couch. "Another grateful patient?" "Mrs. Williams. She's such a dear." Caroline kicked off her shoes and curled up next to me. "She said they belong to her mother, but she has no daughters to pass them to. It broke my heart." I nodded, pretending to watch the news. "That's nice of her." "You seem distracted lately," Caroline said, studying my face. "Everything okay at work?" "Just tired." But I wasn't tired. I was calculating. I'd spent the last 2 weeks checking every charge on our card, every story Caroline told about her patients, every late night and weekend shift. The pattern was clear once you knew how to look. Caroline was lying about everything. The next morning, after she left for work, I called Silver Birch. "This is Zach Halperin," I told the receptionist. "My wife Caroline works there. I'm supposed to pick her up tonight, but I can't remember if she said 7 or 8. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Halperin. Caroline isn't scheduled today. She's been working reduced hours this month. Would you like me to check when she's next on the schedule? I hung up without answering. Caroline wasn't at work. She hadn't been at work on half the days she'd told me she was working. So where was she spending those hours? And who was she spending them with? I drove to Silver Birch and parked across the street. The facility was smaller than I'd expected, a converted Victorian mansion with modern additions. Caroline had worked here for 3 years, ever since the hospital cut nursing staff. She'd called it a blessing. More personal connection with patients, she said. More meaningful work. More opportunity to lie, apparently. I waited until visiting hours started, then walked inside. The receptionist was a young woman with pink hair and multiple piercings. "I'm looking for information about one of your residents," I said. "Mrs. Patterson?" "My wife Caroline is her nurse, and I wanted to send flowers." The girl looked confused. "Mrs. Patterson? I don't think we have anyone by that name. Let me check." She typed on her computer. "No, sorry, no Patterson here." "Are you sure you have the right facility? What about Mrs. Williams or Mrs. Henderson?" More typing, more head shaking. "We have a Mr. Williams in room 12, but no Mrs. Williams. And definitely no Henderson." I felt the floor shift under my feet. Caroline had been telling me detailed stories about these people for months. Their families, their medical conditions, their final words. All of it fiction. "Thank you," I managed to say. Outside, I sat in my truck and tried to think. Caroline was lying about working, lying about her patients, buying expensive jewelry, and charging romantic dinners to our joint account. The evidence painted a picture I didn't want to see, but I'd been in construction long enough to know that ignoring structural damage doesn't make it go away. My phone rang. Caroline. "Hey, baby." Her voice was warm, loving. "I'm going to be late again. Mrs. Henderson took a turn for the worse. Her daughter is driving in from Seattle." "That's rough," I said. "I know, but I can't leave her alone. You understand, right?" "Of course." "You're a good woman, Caroline." "I love you." "Love you too." I hung up and stared at the phone. She was good at this. The concern in her voice, the perfect details, the way she made herself sound noble and self-sacrificing. If I hadn't done the research, I would have believed every word. But Mrs. Henderson didn't exist. I drove home and opened my laptop. Time to find out where my wife really was when she claimed to be comforting the dying. The GPS tracker was smaller than a matchbox and cost $200. I attached it to the underside of Caroline's Honda while she slept, my hands steady despite the hammering of my heart. 15 years of marriage, and I was reduced to this. But I needed to know. The tracking app showed her leaving the house at 7:30 the next morning, just like always. But instead of driving to Silver Birch, the red dot headed downtown to the Grandview Hotel. Expensive place. The kind where politicians held fundraisers and businessmen entertained clients, not where you'd expect to find a home care nurse on a Tuesday morning. I gave her an hour head start, then drove downtown. The Grandview rose 30 stories above the city, all glass and steel and money. The valet parking alone cost more than I made in a day. Caroline's Honda sat in the parking structure, level 3 near the elevators. I found a coffee shop across the street with a clear view of the hotel entrance and settled in to wait. 3 hours later, Caroline emerged with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, well-dressed, expensive haircut. He said something that made her laugh, then kissed her cheek before walking to a black BMW. I took pictures with my phone. The license plate. His face. Caroline getting into her car, still smiling. That night, she came home tired and drained. "How was Mrs. Henderson?" I asked. "Peaceful at the end. Her daughter made it just in time." Caroline's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "It's always hard losing one of them. She was good. Damn good." If I hadn't seen her laughing with another man outside a luxury hotel, I would have held her while she grieved for her fictional patient. Instead, I nodded and pretended to care about her performance. The next day, I ran the BMW's license plate through a contact at the DMV. The car was registered to Bryce Delaney, age 35, address in Harbor Hills, the richest part of the city. A quick internet search told me everything I needed to know. Bryce Delaney, heir to Delaney Construction, board member of 3 charities, regular attendee at political fundraisers, single, according to the society pages. Not anymore. I spent the rest of the week following Caroline's patterns. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, she went to Silver Birch for her reduced schedule. Tuesday and Thursday, she met Bryce at the Grandview. Always the same room, suite 1247, always the same time, 8 a.m. to noon. She'd turned adultery into a part-time job, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how good she was at lying to me, how she could describe Mrs. Henderson's imaginary daughter with perfect detail, make up conversations that never happened, create an entire fictional world to hide her betrayal. The worst part was realizing I'd been living with a stranger for years. On Friday, I decided to get closer. I called in sick to work and positioned myself in the Grandview's lobby, hidden behind a newspaper in a chair that faced the elevators. Caroline arrived at 8 sharp, dressed in civilian clothes instead of scrubs. She went straight to the elevator like she belonged there, confident, comfortable. At 10:30, I saw them together. They came down to the hotel restaurant, sitting at a corner table by the windows. Bryce kept touching her hand while they talked. Caroline leaned forward, animated and happy in a way I hadn't seen her in months. They looked like a couple. They looked like they were in love. I watched them share dessert and felt 15 years of marriage crumble into dust. That's when I stopped being Zach, the trusting husband, and became something else. Something colder. Something that could plan and wait and strike when the time was right. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Evidence, documentation, proof. Caroline wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that I played to win. "You've been different lately," Caroline said over dinner that night. She'd made my favorite, pot roast with those little potatoes I liked. The perfect wife if you ignored the afternoon she'd spent in another man's bed. Different how? Distant. Distracted. She reached across the table to touch my hand. "Are you having problems at work?" I looked at her face, really looked at it. The concerned expression was flawless. The loving touch felt genuine. If I hadn't seen the photos on my phone, I might have opened up to her, told her about my fears and insecurities, but I had seen the photos. "Just tired," I said, pulling my hand away. "Long days." Something flickered in her eyes. Annoyance? Calculation? It was gone too fast to identify. "Maybe you should talk to someone," she said. "Dr. Reeves has been great for my stress management." "You're seeing a therapist?" "Just a few sessions. Work can be emotionally draining, you know?" "All that death and suffering." She smiled sadly. "I want to be the best version of myself for you." More lies. I'd checked our insurance. No claims for therapy sessions. No Dr. Reeves in our network. Caroline was building an entire fictional support system to explain away any behavior that didn't fit her saint act. "That's great, honey. I'm glad you're taking care of yourself." "You should consider it too," she said, watching my face carefully. "Sometimes talking to a professional helps us understand our own behavior patterns." There it was. The subtle suggestion that I was the problem. That my suspicions were symptoms of some psychological issue rather than reasonable responses to her deception. Gaslighting. The word had become popular lately, but I'd never experienced it firsthand. It was more insidious than I'd expected. The way she planted doubt in my own perceptions made me question what I was seeing. But I had proof now. Photos and credit card statements and GPS tracking data. Caroline could suggest I was crazy all she wanted. The evidence said otherwise. "Maybe you're right," I said. "I'll think about it." She smiled and squeezed my hand. "I love you, Zach. I just want us to be happy." "I know. I love you too." The lie came easily, too easily. Maybe I was learning from the master. After dinner, while Caroline showered, I expanded my investigation. Bryce Delaney wasn't hard to research. His family's construction company had contracts all over the state. Government buildings, corporate offices, luxury developments. They were connected, wealthy, and powerful. They also had a history of ethics violations. 3 years ago, Delaney Construction had been investigated for bribing city officials to secure a courthouse renovation contract. The charges were dropped due to lack of evidence, but the news articles painted a picture of a company willing to bend rules to get what it wanted. 2 years ago, Bryce himself had been arrested for assault outside a downtown nightclub. Again, charges were dropped. Money and lawyers had made the problem disappear. Last year, there had been whispers about connections to organized crime. Nothing proven, but the rumors persisted. Caroline had excellent taste in men. I dug deeper, cross-referencing Bryce's business interests with Caroline's work history. Silver Birch Retirement Estate was owned by a company called Sunset Holdings. Sunset Holdings was owned by another company, which was owned by another company. But at the end of the chain, I found what I was looking for. Delaney Industries owned Silver Birch. Caroline wasn't just cheating on me. She was cheating on me with her boss. Martin Cho had been my friend since high school. We'd kept in touch over the years, meeting for beers whenever our schedules aligned. He was quiet, methodical, the kind of guy who could disappear into the background while everyone else was talking. Perfect qualities for someone who worked IT at Silver Birch. "I need a favor," I told him over lunch at a dive bar downtown. "It's about Caroline." Martin's expression didn't change, but I saw him tense slightly. "What kind of favor?" "Information. About who she's been spending time with at work?" "Zach," Martin set down his beer, "are you sure you want to go down this road?" "I'm already down it. I just need to know how far it goes." Martin was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Finally, he sighed. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." "You knew." "I suspected. She's been accessing patient files she has no business looking at. Financial information, insurance details, family contact data. I flagged it with my supervisor, but nothing happened." "Why not?" "Because the orders to give her access came from upstairs, way upstairs." I felt pieces clicking into place. "Bryce Delaney?" Martin's eyes widened. "How did you—" "Never mind. Yeah. Delaney called my boss directly. Said Caroline was working on a special project for the board." "What kind of project?" "I don't know, but I can tell you what files she's been accessing." Martin pulled out his phone and showed me a list of names. 23 patients over the last 6 months, all wealthy, all with minimal family contact. I stared at the list. Every name was unfamiliar. Not Mrs. Patterson or Mrs. Williams or Mrs. Henderson. These were real people. Real patients with real assets. Martin, I think they're stealing from these people." "I think so too, but I can't prove anything without more access than I have." "What would you need?" "Time alone with the financial systems. And someone to watch my back." I thought about it. Breaking into computer systems wasn't exactly legal, but neither was elder abuse. Neither was embezzlement. When? Sunday night. Skeleton crew, minimal security. "But Zach, if we're wrong about this, we're not wrong." Martin nodded slowly. "Okay, but we do this my way, clean and quiet, no cowboy stuff." "Agreed." We shook hands across the table. I had an ally now. Someone who knew the system and could help me prove what Caroline and Bryce were doing. But more importantly, I had someone who could help me figure out how to stop them. Sunday night, Silver Birch looked different, darker. The cheerful facade that fooled families during visiting hours was gone, replaced by institutional coldness. Martin used his key card to get us inside through the employee entrance. "Security makes rounds every 2 hours, he whispered as we moved through empty hallways. "We have until 11:30. The IT office was cramped and cluttered, filled with servers and monitors and cables running everywhere. Martin sat down at his workstation and began typing. "Patient financial records are kept on a separate server," he explained. "Supposedly more secure, but if you know what you're doing." I watched over his shoulder as he navigated through screens full of data. Names, account numbers, medical conditions, insurance information, lives reduced to digital files. "There," Martin said, pointing at the screen. "Eleanor Whitman, age 87. Admitted 6 months ago with dementia. No immediate family. Power of attorney granted to—" He paused. "Holy crap. What?" "Power of attorney was granted to Caroline. As her primary care nurse." I felt cold spreading through my chest. "That's legal?" "If the patient has no family and is mentally incompetent, the state can assign guardianship to qualified caregivers. But there are supposed to be oversight procedures, background checks, approval processes. Let me guess, none of that happened here. Worse than that, look at this." Martin opened another file. "Mrs.? Whitman's assets have been liquidated over the past 5 months. Stocks, bonds, savings accounts, everything converted to cash and transferred to an account I can't access from here. How much? 2.7 million? I stared at the number. Mrs. Whitman had been worth nearly $3 million, and Caroline had stolen it all. How many others? I asked. Martin's fingers flew across the keyboard. 12 patients with similar patterns. All elderly, all with dementia or other cognitive impairments, all with Caroline listed as power of attorney. He added up figures. Total assets liquidated, Jesus, over $18 million. $18 million. Caroline and Bryce weren't just having an affair. They were running a systematic elder abuse operation, targeting the most vulnerable residents of Silver Birch. We need to copy everything, I said. Already on it. Martin was downloading files to an encrypted drive. Financial records, patient charts, transfer authorizations, everything we can grab. What about Caroline's access logs? Times, dates, which files she opened? Got it. She's been particularly active in the last month, almost like she knew someone was getting suspicious, or like she was preparing to disappear. I thought about her recent behavior, the new jewelry, the expensive dinners, the way she'd been pushing me toward therapy. Maybe she was planning to leave, take the money and run with Bryce to some tropical paradise. How long to copy everything? 20 more minutes. But Zach, what are we going to do with this? If we go to the police, they'll want to know how we got it. I'd been thinking about that. We don't go to the police. Not yet. First, we go to the one group that has even more to lose than we do. Who? The Retirement Home Board. If this gets out, Silver Birch is finished. Lawsuits, criminal charges, federal investigations. They'll want to handle this quietly. Martin looked skeptical. You think they'll take action against Delaney? He practically owns this place. Money talks. But 18 million in stolen assets talks louder. We finished copying the files and erased our digital footprints as best we could. By the time we left, Silver Birch looked peaceful again. Just another retirement home where families trusted their loved ones to be cared for. But I knew the truth now. Caroline wasn't an angel of mercy. She was a predator who targeted the helpless and stole their dignity along with their money. The worst part? She was good at it, professional, systematic. She'd probably been planning this for years, building relationships and trust before moving in for the kill. She'd married me for the same reason. Cover, respectability. A normal husband to make her seem like a normal woman. I'd been her longest con. The email went out Tuesday morning to every member of Silver Birch's board of directors. Urgent, suspected elder abuse. Confidential review required. Attached were financial records showing systematic asset stripping of vulnerable patients. Power of attorney documents signed under suspicious circumstances. Transfer authorizations of moving millions of dollars to untraceable accounts. I didn't sign the email. Didn't leave any trail back to me or Martin. Just cold, hard evidence delivered to people who had the power to act on it. Caroline came home that evening in a strange mood. Agitated, but trying to hide it. Rough day? I asked. Board meeting tomorrow. Some kind of internal audit? She poured herself a glass of wine. Unusual for a weeknight. Probably nothing, but you know how these things go. I nodded sympathetically. I'm sure it's routine. Of course it is. I've never had so much as a reprimand in 3 years. But her hands were shaking slightly as she drank her wine. The next afternoon, she called me at work. Her voice was tight with controlled panic. I've been suspended, she said. Pending investigation of some ridiculous allegations. What kind of allegations? Financial impropriety. They're claiming I had unauthorized access to patient accounts. That's insane. Who would accuse you of something like that? I don't know. But someone's been spreading lies about me, making up stories. Her voice hardened. Probably that witch Morrison from Day Shift. She's always been jealous of my patient relationships. I almost admired the way she spun it. Even facing evidence of her crimes, Caroline was creating a narrative where she was the victim. What happens now? Bryce, Mr. Delaney is handling it. He knows I'm innocent. This will all blow over once they realize they've been fed false information. Bryce was handling it. Of course he was. Time to apply more pressure. That night, I drove to Harbor Hills and parked outside Bryce's mansion. I'd done research on the property. 12,000 square feet on 3 acres, worth about $4 million. The kind of house that screamed money and power. I waited until midnight, then walked around the property line. Good security system, but I wasn't planning to break in. I just wanted to get close enough to leave a message. The BMW was parked in the circular driveway. I slipped a manila envelope under the windshield wiper and walked away. Inside the envelope, copies of financial records showing exactly how much money had been stolen from Silver Birch patients, photos of Caroline and Bryce together at the Grandview Hotel. A single sheet of paper with one typed line, Stop now or this goes public. No signature, no demands, just a warning. The next morning, my phone rang at 6 a.m. Unknown number. This is Bryce Delaney. We need to talk. His voice was calm, controlled, the voice of someone used to being in charge. About what? You know what? 1 hour, Riverside Park, by the boathouse. And if I don't show, then you'll regret it. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, adrenaline flooding my system. Bryce knew who had sent the evidence. He knew I was onto them, and he was confident enough to threaten me directly. Time to find out just how dangerous Caroline's boyfriend really was. Riverside Park at 7 a.m. was nearly empty. A few joggers, some dog walkers, nobody paying attention to the two men meeting by the water. Bryce Delaney looked exactly like his photos. Tall, expensively dressed, the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. He was waiting by the boathouse when I arrived, hands in his pockets like he didn't have a care in the world. Mr. Halperin, he said as I approached, thank you for coming. What do you want? To discuss your recent correspondence. He pulled the envelope from his jacket. Very impressive detective work. I'm curious how you managed to access private financial records. Does it matter? It might. Illegal surveillance, computer hacking, industrial espionage, these are serious federal crimes. His smile was cold. Much more serious than the civil matters you think you've uncovered. Civil matters? You stole $18 million from helpless old people. I prefer to think of it as aggressive asset management. These people were dying, Mr. Halperin. Their money was just sitting there, earning minimal interest while they waited to die. We put it to better use. The casual way he said it made my skin crawl, like he was discussing a business strategy instead of describing the systematic abuse of vulnerable human beings. Caroline's suspended, I said, temporarily. The board will realize they've made a mistake once cooler heads prevail. Not with the evidence I have. Evidence obtained through illegal means. Inadmissible in court, worthless for any legitimate purpose. He stepped closer. But potentially damaging to innocent reputations if misused by vindictive individuals. Innocent reputations? Caroline is a dedicated nurse who's devoted her career to caring for the elderly. You're a bitter husband who can't accept that his wife has outgrown him. I felt something snap inside me. Outgrown me? She told me about your difficulties, the drinking, the anger issues, the way you've been stalking her. It's quite sad, really. More lies, more manipulation. Caroline had been preparing her defense for months, painting me as an unstable husband to explain away any accusations I might make. Here's what's going to happen, Bryce continued. You're going to destroy whatever evidence you think you have. You're going to stop harassing my employees and my business, and you're going to get the professional help you clearly need. And if I don't, he smiled, then Maurice will pay you a visit. As if summoned, a large man emerged from behind a tree about 50 yards away, 6 feet tall, heavily built, moving with the loose-limbed grace of someone comfortable with violence. Maurice Franks, Bryce said by way of introduction. Former Marine, former guest of the state correctional system. Currently in my employ as a security consultant. Maurice walked closer, and I could see the scars on his knuckles, the dead look in his eyes. This wasn't someone who issued warnings. This was someone who solved problems permanently. 1 week, mister. Halperin. Clean up your act or Maurice will clean it up for you. Bryce turned and walked away, confident he'd made his point. Morris lingered for a moment, studying me like I was a problem he was already planning to solve. Then he followed his boss, leaving me alone by the water. I stood there for a long time, watching the sun come up over the river. 3 hours ago, I'd been a building inspector with a cheating wife and a broken marriage. Now I was in the crosshairs of criminals who'd already stolen millions and wouldn't hesitate to eliminate to protect their operation. The smart thing would be to walk away. Cut my losses, file for divorce, let the authorities handle the criminal investigation. But I couldn't stop thinking about those patient files. Eleanor Whitman, 87 years old, dementia patient with no family. $2.7 million stolen while she sat in a nursing home chair, probably wondering why no one visited anymore. $18 million stolen from people who trusted Caroline to care for them. No, walking away wasn't an option. If Bryce wanted a war, I'd give him one. but it would be fought on my terms, not his. Maurice found me in the Home Depot parking lot 3 days later. I was loading drywall into my truck when a shadow fell across the tailgate. I looked up to see him standing there, hands in his pockets, that same dead expression on his face. "Mr. Delaney asked me to check on your progress," he said. "Tell Mr. Delaney to go to hell." Maurice smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "I was hoping you'd say that." He moved faster than I expected for a big man. One moment he was standing by my truck, the next his fist was driving toward my face. I threw myself sideways and his knuckles scraped across my cheek instead of breaking my nose. "You want to do this here?" I asked, backing away from the truck. "Don't matter to me where." He came at me again, throwing a combination that would have put me down if any of it had connected. But I'd been in enough bar fights to recognize someone who relied more on intimidation than skill. Maurice was strong and mean, but he wasn't a fighter. I was. When he overextended on a wild right hook, I stepped inside and drove my knee into his ribs. He grunted and stumbled backward, and I followed up with an uppercut that snapped his head back. Maurice went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. I grabbed the tire iron from my truck and stood over him. "Here's a message for your boss. I'm not scared of him, and I'm not scared of you. If he wants to play games, we'll play games." Maurice rolled onto his side, spitting blood. "You don't know who you're ducking with." "Sure I do. I'm fucking with thieves and con artists who prey on helpless old people. And you know what? I'm going to destroy them." I walked back to my truck and drove away, leaving Maurice bleeding in the parking lot. That night, I called Martin. "We need everything," I told him. "Every file, every transaction, every communication between Caroline and Bryce. I don't care what we have to do to get it. Zach, what happened? You sound different. They sent someone to intimidate me." "It didn't work." Martin was quiet for a moment. "Okay, but we're going to need help. What they're doing goes way beyond simple embezzlement." "What do you mean?" "I've been digging deeper into the financial transfers. The money isn't just disappearing, it's being moved through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Professional money laundering. Meaning Bryce Delaney isn't just stealing from old people. He's running those proceeds through organized crime connections. This is federal racketeering territory." I felt a chill run down my spine. Caroline wasn't just cheating on me with a con artist. She was involved with someone connected to the mob. "Can you prove it?" "Given enough time and access, yes. But we're talking about evidence that could put some very dangerous people in prison for life. Then we better make sure we do it right." The next morning, I drove to the office of Janet Morrison, CPA. I'd found her name in the phone book. Small practice, no connections to Delaney or Silver Birch. The kind of person who might be willing to help if properly motivated. "I need someone to review financial documents," I told her. "Complex transactions involving potential fraud." She was in her 50s, gray-haired and serious. "What kind of fraud?" "Elder abuse, systematic theft from retirement home patients." Her expression hardened. "My mother was in a nursing home before she died. If someone's stealing from vulnerable people, they are. I can prove it. But I need a professional to analyze the evidence and prepare a report that will hold up in court." "This isn't some kind of divorce case, is it? Husband trying to make trouble for his wife?" I met her eyes. "My wife is one of the thieves." "But this isn't about our marriage. It's about $18 million stolen from people who trusted her to care for them." Janet studied me for a long moment. "Show me what you have." The Silver Birch board meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. 7 members, including Joanne Peltz, the board chair who'd been running the facility for 12 years. I'd spent the week preparing. Janet Morrison had analyzed the financial records and prepared a comprehensive report documenting the theft. Martin had provided detailed access logs showing exactly when and how Caroline had manipulated patient accounts. I had surveillance photos of Caroline and Bryce together. But most importantly, I had leverage. Because while researching Bryce's business connections, I discovered something interesting. 3 of the board members had business relationships with Delaney Construction. Contracts, partnerships, mutual investments. If the theft operation went public, they wouldn't just lose their positions. They'd face criminal liability for enabling it. They needed this problem to disappear quietly, which meant they needed someone to blame. I arrived at Silver Birch 30 minutes early and positioned myself in the parking lot with a clear view of the building. At 1:45, Bryce's BMW pulled up. He got out alone, straightened his tie, and walked inside with the confidence of a man who owned the place. At 2:15, my phone rang. "This is Joanne Peltz." "You sent materials to the board regarding Caroline Halperin?" "I did. We need to speak with you immediately." "I'm in the parking lot." 5 minutes later, I was sitting in the Silver Birch conference room facing 7 very unhappy board members. Bryce sat at the far end of the table, his face carefully neutral. Joanne Peltz was a thin woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and the kind of authoritative presence that came from decades of dealing with difficult people. "Mr. Halperin," she began, "you've made some very serious allegations. I've provided documentation of systematic elder abuse and embezzlement. $18 million stolen from vulnerable patients over 6 months. Documentation obtained through illegal surveillance and computer hacking," Bryce interjected. "None of it admissible in any legal proceeding." "We're not in court, Mr. Delaney. This is an internal review." Joanne opened the folder I'd sent her. "Financial records show significant irregularities in patient account management, unauthorized power of attorney assignments, asset liquidation without proper oversight. All approved through proper channels," Bryce said. "Caroline Halperin was acting under my direct authorization as facility administrator. Your authorization to steal from patients? My authorization to manage assets for patients with no family support. Standard practice in elder care facilities." I slid another folder across the table. "Standard practice doesn't include moving money through offshore shell companies or using proceeds to purchase luxury hotel suites and jewelry." The room went quiet. Joanne opened the new folder and her face went pale. "These are bank records," she said slowly, "showing exactly where the stolen money went. Cayman Islands accounts, Swiss banks, real estate purchases in Costa Rica, all connected to companies controlled by Mr. Delaney." Bryce's composure finally cracked. "You can't prove any connection. I can prove all of it. Financial transactions, property records, corporate filings. Your girlfriend was very thorough in documenting her crimes. Caroline's not my girlfriend. She's a dedicated employee who..." I placed my phone on the table and hit play. Hotel security footage I'd obtained through a private investigator, showing Caroline and Bryce entering and leaving Suite 1247 together over multiple visits. Dedicated to something, certainly. The board members were staring at the phone screen in horror. Their facility, their reputations, their careers, all destroyed by 2 people who couldn't keep their greed in check. "What do you want?" Joanne asked quietly. "Justice. Caroline and Bryce prosecuted to the full extent of the law. The stolen money returned to patient accounts or their families. And if we cooperate with this investigation, then maybe the media doesn't need to know how 7 intelligent board members allowed $18 million to be stolen under their noses." Bryce stood up suddenly. "This is extortion." "You can't..." "I can do whatever's necessary to protect the victims of your crimes." That's when Maurice walked into the conference room. He looked better than when I'd left him bleeding in the parking lot, but there was fresh anger in his eyes. And something else, desperation. "Mr. Delaney," he said, "we have a problem." "Not now, Morris." "Yeah, now." Maurice pulled out his phone and showed the screen to Bryce. "FBI's been asking questions about shell companies. Someone tipped them off about money laundering." The room exploded into chaos. Board members started talking at once, voices raised in panic and accusation. Bryce went white, staring at Morris's phone like it contained his death warrant. I smiled and stood up. "Gentlemen, ladies, I think we're done here." As I walked toward the door, Bryce grabbed my arm. "You bastard! You've destroyed everything. You destroyed it yourself when you decided to steal from dying people." I shook off his grip and kept walking. Behind me, I could hear the board members demanding answers, threatening lawsuits, pointing fingers at each other. Outside, I sat in my truck and called Caroline. "Hey, baby," she answered, voice tight with stress. "How was your day?" "Interesting." "Yours?" "Difficult. The board situation is getting worse. They're asking all kinds of questions I can't answer." "Maybe it's time to tell the truth." Silence on the other end. Then, "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know about Bryce. I know about the money. I know about all of it. Caroline?" The silence stretched longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. colder. Come home, Zach. We need to talk. Caroline was waiting in the living room when I got home. She'd changed out of her scrubs into jeans and a sweater, casual clothes that made her look younger, more vulnerable. The performance was already starting. Sit down, she said softly. Please. I remained standing. How long? How long what? How long have you been stealing from patients? How long have you been sleeping with Bryce? How long have you been lying to me about everything? She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, the mask was gone. The woman looking at me was a stranger, cold, calculating, utterly without remorse. Since about 6 months after I started at Silver Birch? Maybe longer. Why? Because I could. Because those people were going to die anyway, and their money was just sitting there doing nothing. She shrugged. Because I deserved better than this. She gestured around our modest living room at the life we'd built together over 15 years. Better than what? Better than me? Better than struggling to pay bills every month? Better than driving a 10-year-old Honda and shopping at discount stores? Better than being married to a building inspector who thinks small and dreams smaller? Each word hit like a physical blow. This wasn't just about an affair or even about money. This was about Caroline's fundamental contempt for everything we'd shared. You could have divorced me, left any time, and give up half of nothing? No thanks. This was easier. Using me as cover while you stole millions? Using you as camouflage. The faithful husband, the stable marriage, the respectable nurse who'd never do anything questionable. She smiled without warmth. You were perfect for that role. I felt something break inside me. Not my heart. That had been breaking slowly for months. Something deeper, something that had believed in the fundamental goodness of the person I'd shared my life with. The patients you described, Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Henderson, all fictional. Not all fictional, based on real people I was stealing from. I just edited their stories to make them more sympathetic. You practiced your lies on me. I practiced my craft. And I got very good at it. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street where we'd lived as neighbors and friends with decent people who worked honest jobs. Bryce is leaving the country tomorrow, she said, without turning around. Costa Rica doesn't have an extradition treaty for financial crimes. And you're going with him. I was. But you've complicated things. Good. She turned back to me, and I saw something dangerous in her eyes. Bryce thinks you might be a problem. He thinks maybe you should have an accident before you can cause any more trouble. Is that a threat? It's a warning. Maurice is very good at making problems disappear. I thought about the tire iron in my truck, about the way Maurice had gone down when I'd fought back in the parking lot. Maurice already tried. It didn't work out the way he planned. Caroline looked surprised. You hurt Maurice? I defended myself, just like I'm going to defend myself against anyone else who tries to silence me. You don't understand, Zach. This isn't just about Bryce and me anymore. The money we took belongs to some very serious people. People who don't accept losses gracefully. What people? Bryce has business relationships, partnerships that require discretion and loyalty. When $18 million goes missing, those partners want explanations. My blood went cold. You're telling me you stole money from the mob? I'm telling you that Costa Rica is looking better and better, and that you should seriously consider disappearing until this all blows over. I'm not running anywhere. Then you're going to get eliminated. And probably me with you, thanks to your amateur detective work. She moved toward the front door, then stopped and looked back at me. For what it's worth, I did love you once. Before I figured out that love doesn't pay bills or buy beautiful things or take you to places where people treat you like you matter. And now, I think you're a small, petty man who's about to get himself eliminated because he can't accept that his wife outgrew him. She opened the door, then paused again. Goodbye, Zach. Try not to get murdered before I'm safely out of the country. The door closed behind her with a soft click. I stood alone in the living room, surrounded by 15 years of shared memories that had all been revealed as lies. But Caroline had made a mistake. She'd assumed I was the same man who'd trusted her blindly for all those years, the same man who'd accepted her stories and believed her performances. She was wrong. I pulled out my phone and called the number Martin had given me. Agent Williams, this is Zach Halperin. I have information about the Silver Birch investigation. Mr. Halprin, we've been hoping to hear from you. I can give you Caroline and Bryce, but I want them taken down tonight before they can run. What do you have in mind? I looked around the empty house at the life Caroline had just walked away from. A trap, and they're going to walk right into it. The call came at midnight. Zach! Caroline's voice was desperate, panicked. I need your help. What's wrong? Bryce is gone. Someone eliminated him in his hotel room, shot twice in the head. I sat up in bed, instantly alert. Where are you? Safe house downtown. But they're looking for me next. The people Bryce was working with, they think I know where their money is. Do you? Some of it. Enough to get myself eliminated. She was crying now, or doing a good impression of it. Zach, I know I hurt you. I know you hate me, but I'm scared. What do you want me to do? Meet me? Help me figure out how to get out of this alive. Caroline, please. I'll give you everything. Account numbers, passwords, evidence against Bryce's partners. Enough to put them all away forever. Just help me disappear before they find me. It was a good performance. Vulnerable, desperate, appealing to whatever residual feelings I might have for the woman I'd been married to for 15 years. But I'd learned to recognize Caroline's performances. Where? I asked. The warehouse district, Pier 47. There's an old fish processing plant. I'm hiding on the second floor. I'll be there in an hour. Thank you. And Zach, come alone. If they see anyone else. I understand. I hung up and immediately called Agent Williams. She took the bait, I said. You're sure it's a trap? Bryce isn't dead. This is their exit strategy. Get me out of the way, then disappear with the money. The warehouse is already surrounded, but you still have to go in there. I know. If something goes wrong, it won't. I'm done being played by these people. Pier 47 was dark and empty, the old fish processing plant a hulking shadow against the night sky. I parked where Caroline would expect me to park and walked toward the building, knowing that FBI agents were positioned in the darkness around me. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the plant smelled of rust and decay. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting strange shadows on abandoned equipment. Zach? Caroline's voice echoed from somewhere above. Up here. I climbed the metal stairs to the second floor, my footsteps loud in the empty building. Caroline was waiting in what had once been an office, silhouetted against a window overlooking the harbor. Thank you for coming, she said, moving toward me. Where's Bryce? Dead. I told you. You told me a lot of things over the years. Most of them lies. She stopped, studying my face in the dim light. You don't believe me. I stopped believing you the day I found out Mrs. Patterson didn't exist. Caroline sighed and dropped the desperate act. Then why are you here? To watch you get arrested. The lights came on. Bryce stepped out from behind a pillar, very much alive, with Morris beside him. Both men were armed. Actually, Bryce said, you're here to die. I looked at Caroline, who was smiling now. Let me guess. The grieving widow, driven to life, ending by the trauma of losing her husband to organized crime violence. Very good, she said. Though we'll make it look like an ending life. You eliminated me, then yourself, overcome with guilt about the crimes you committed. What crimes? The ones we're going to pin on you. Caroline's been very helpful in documenting your suspicious behavior over the past few months. Stalking, hacking, threatening innocent people. Bryce raised his gun. The building inspector who snapped and decided to frame his wife for his own embezzlement scheme. Except the FBI already has all the evidence. Bank records, surveillance footage, financial transactions. They know exactly who stole the money. The FBI has nothing, Bryce said. All your so-called evidence was obtained illegally. Inadmissible in court. You're right. It would be inadmissible in court. I pulled out my phone and hit a button. Agent Williams's voice echoed through the building. This is the FBI. The building is surrounded. Drop your weapons and come out with your hands visible. Bryce spun toward the windows, cursing. You son of a witch. The phone's been broadcasting everything for the last 10 minutes. Every threat, every admission, every detail of your plan to murder me. Maurice raised his gun toward me, but red laser dots appeared on his chest and forehead. FBI snipers positioned in the buildings across the street. Drop the weapon, a voice called through a megaphone. Now, Maurice looked at Bryce, who nodded. Both men let their guns fall to the floor. Caroline was staring at me with something like admiration. You really did learn, didn't you? I learned that everything I thought I knew about you was wrong. I learned that the woman I loved never existed. She existed for a while, before I realized I could do better. Federal agents poured into the building, weapons drawn, shouting orders. Bryce and Maurice were forced to their knees, hands behind their heads. Caroline stood calmly as an agent approached with handcuffs. Caroline Halperin, Agent Williams said, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, embezzlement, money laundering, and attempted murder. As they read her rights, Caroline looked back at me one last time. You know what the funny thing is, she said. I really did love you, but love doesn't pay for the life I wanted. Then you never understood what love actually was. They led her away, along with Bryce and Maurice. I stood alone in the abandoned factory, watching 15 years of marriage disappear into the back of federal transport vehicles. Agent Williams approached me as the last of the criminals was loaded into the van. We got them, she said. All of them. The money laundering operation, the mob connections, everything. What happens to the stolen money? What we can recover will go back to the victims' families. It won't bring back the people who died, but it's something. I nodded and walked toward the exit. Outside, the harbor was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Mr. Halperin? Agent Williams called after me. Yeah? What are you going to do now? I looked out at the water, at the city waking up beyond the docks. Somewhere out there, people were starting their day, trusting that the institutions meant to protect them would actually protect them. Trusting that the people who claimed to love them actually did. Some of them were wrong about that trust, but some of them weren't. I'm going to go home, I said, and figure out what comes next. I drove through the empty streets as the sun came up, thinking about Caroline's final words. She'd loved me, but love hadn't been enough to overcome her greed and ambition. Maybe that said something about the quality of her love, or maybe it said something about the world we lived in, where love had to compete with money and status and the promise of something better. Either way, it was over now. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the house Caroline and I had shared. Our neighbors would wake up soon, start their own days, probably wonder why there were news vans on the street and FBI agents asking questions. Eventually, they'd learn the truth. That the sweet nurse who'd lived next door for 3 years was actually a criminal who'd stolen millions from the people she was supposed to care for. They'd be shocked, horrified. They'd wonder how they could have been so wrong about someone they thought they knew. I understood the feeling. Inside, the house felt different, empty in a way that had nothing to do with Caroline's absence. Like something fundamental had been removed, leaving behind just the shell of what had once been a home. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the morning news report on the arrests. Caroline's photo filled the screen, her professional headshot from Silver Birch, smiling and compassionate and completely false. The reporter was calling it the largest elder abuse case in state history. $18 million stolen from vulnerable patients. 3 arrests, with more expected as the investigation continued. They interviewed one victim's daughter, an elderly woman who'd trusted Caroline to care for her mother in her final days. The daughter was crying, talking about how Caroline had seemed so caring, so dedicated. She held my mother's hand when she died, the woman said. I thought she was an angel. I turned off the TV and finished my coffee in silence. Later that morning, Martin called. You okay? He asked. I'm alive. That's more than Caroline and Bryce planned for me. What's next? I looked around the empty house at 15 years of accumulated life that suddenly felt meaningless. I don't know. Divorce proceedings, I guess? Trying to figure out what's real and what was part of her performance? You want to grab lunch later? Talk it through? Yeah, that sounds good. After we hung up, I walked through the house one more time. In the bedroom, Caroline's jewelry box sat open on the dresser. Empty now, the FBI had seized everything as evidence. I picked up a framed photo from our wedding day. Caroline in white, radiant and beautiful, looking at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. Had that been real, or just another performance? I'd probably never know. I put the photo face down and walked out of the room. 3 months later, I was having lunch with Martin when he showed me a newspaper clipping. Caroline had been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Bryce got 30. Maurice took a plea deal and would serve 15. Justice, Martin said. Of a sort. The article mentioned that Caroline had tried to claim she was a victim too, manipulated by Bryce into participating in crime she didn't fully understand. The judge hadn't bought it. What about the mob connections? I asked. Still under investigation, but Bryce's partners have bigger problems now than one missing accountant. I folded the clipping and put it in my wallet, not as a souvenir, but as a reminder. Evidence that evil sometimes gets punished, even when it wears a familiar face and sleeps in your bed for 15 years. You dating anyone yet? Martin asked. Not yet. Still figuring out how to trust my own judgment again. That'll come back. Maybe. We finished lunch and walked out into the afternoon sunshine. Life went on. People fell in love and got married and trusted each other with their hearts and their futures. Most of the time, that trust wasn't misplaced. Most of the time. I drove home to my empty house and checked the mail. Bills, catalogs, and a single envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph, black and white, grainy like it had been taken from a distance. It showed a woman in scrubs walking into what looked like another retirement facility. She was smiling at an elderly man in a wheelchair, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. The woman wasn't Caroline, but she had the same kind of face. Trustworthy, compassionate, the kind of person you'd want caring for your loved ones. On the back of the photo, someone had written a single line in block letters, "The cycle continues." I stared at the photo for a long time, thinking about patterns and predators and the way evil adapted to look like good. Then I picked up my phone and called Agent Williams. "This is Zach Halperin," I said when she answered. "I think you need to see something." Because Caroline was in prison, but the system that had allowed her to operate was still out there. Still vulnerable. Still full of trusting people who believed that nurses were angels and that love was stronger than greed. Someone had to watch the watchers. Someone had to make sure it didn't happen again. I looked at the photo one more time, then grabbed my keys. I had work to do.